My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 32, and I've spent the last 10 years running an event planning and catering company in Charleston, South Carolina, which means I know exactly how a party actually gets paid for. The deposits, the vendor contracts, the fine print nobody reads until something goes wrong. So when I walked onto my mother-in-law's veranda 7 months pregnant, expecting the small family shower she'd promised me, and found 80 people, a professional step and repeat banner, and my own last name missing from every printed program in the room, I already knew two things. I knew exactly which phone call I was about to make from that bathroom, and I had no idea yet that my mother-in-law had unknowingly built her entire party on top of a business account with my name on it. Welcome back to her final chapter, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest at your own life, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. I started in this business at 22 as a third assistant at a wedding planning firm in Savannah, carrying garment bags and running to the parking lot for forgotten boutonnieres. By 26, I'd started Bennett and Company events out of my apartment with one folding table and a laptop that crashed twice a week. 10 years later, we handle roughly 90 events a year across the Low Country, weddings, galas, corporate launches, and I've learned the hard way that the person who actually makes a party happen is rarely the person whose name is on the invitation. It's the person who signed the vendor contracts. My quirk, if you can call it that, started the summer I was 23, when a caterer canceled 4 hours before a wedding reception and I had no backup number saved anywhere but a dead phone battery. I've carried a small leather notebook in my bag every single day since, every vendor's cell number, written by hand, in case the technology ever fails me again. My staff teases me about it. My husband, Elliot, calls it my black book, like I'm running something more interesting than floral deliveries and linen rentals. It's not glamorous. It's just the reason I've never once, in 10 years, had an event fall apart on my watch. Elliot and I met 4 years ago at a charity gala his firm sponsored, one I happened to be running. He's a corporate attorney, steady and quiet in the way people who grew up with money often are, never needing to prove anything, because nobody ever questioned whether he belonged. His mother, Vivian Whitfield, comes from one of Charleston's oldest families, the kind with a plantation-era portrait in the front hall and a standing table at the Junior League luncheon. My own mother died when I was 19, breast cancer, fast and cruel, and I was raised the last 3 years of my childhood by my Aunt Ruth in a 2-bedroom house outside Beaufort, the kind of house where the air conditioner rattled and nobody ever needed a step and repeat banner to know they were loved. I want to be honest about something before I go any further. Some part of me, from the very first Sunday dinner at the Whitfield house, hoped Vivian might become something my own mother's death had left a hole for. I wanted her approval more than I ever let Elliot see. That hope is the reason I let 4 years of small erasures slide by without ever calling them what they were. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in April, while I was between vendor meetings for a June wedding, 7 months into my first pregnancy and starting to feel every one of those months in my lower back. Vivian's voice, when she called, had the particular warmth she reserves for moments she's already decided the outcome of. "Nora, darling, I want to do something special for you and the baby. A small shower. Just close family, out on the veranda, the good china. 20 people, tops. Let me handle everything. You've got quite enough on your plate with the business." I told her that was generous, and it was, on paper. I told her I'd love to help plan it, since planning is, after all, my entire profession. She laughed, warm and dismissive in the same breath. "Oh, sweetheart, you spend all year planning other people's parties. Let someone plan one for you for once. We know what's best for this family. Let us handle it. We know what's best for this family." She'd said some version of that sentence at least a dozen times over 4 years. The first time about our wedding venue, again about our honeymoon registry, again about which pediatrician we should use. I'd let it go every time, telling myself it was generosity wearing an awkward coat, not control wearing a nice one. I said yes. I told myself 20 guests on a veranda was a gift, not a test. I did not ask to see a guest list. I did not ask who was doing the catering. In hindsight, those were the 2 questions that would have told me everything 4 weeks early instead of in real time, in front of 80 people, on the day itself. To understand why I said yes without asking a single follow-up question, you have to understand what happened at my own wedding 3 years earlier. Elliot and I got engaged in October, and Vivian offered to help plan the wedding the following spring, an offer that turned, within 2 weeks, into her taking over entirely. I run an event company. I have planned over 400 weddings for other people. When I suggested vendors I trusted, a florist I'd worked with for 6 years, a photographer whose contract terms I could recite from memory, Vivian smiled the same smile she'd use 4 years later on the phone about the shower and said, "Oh, honey, you'll want to actually enjoy your own wedding. Let the professionals handle it. This is what I do." The wedding cost $175,000, paid entirely by the Whitfield family, held at their historic property outside town, featured in a regional lifestyle magazine 3 months later. The magazine spread ran 2 full pages. It named every vendor Vivian had personally selected. It did not mention my company once, even though half the floral arrangements were sourced through connections I'd built over a decade in the industry, called in as favors, and arranged by my own hands the morning of the ceremony, while Vivian's hired coordinator directed traffic. I read that magazine article in a dentist's waiting room 8 weeks after my wedding and felt something in my chest go quiet and cold, the particular quiet of being erased from your own life by someone smiling the whole time she did it. I didn't say anything to Elliot about it then. I told myself it was a small thing, that Vivian meant well, that this was simply how the Whitfield family operated, grand gestures wrapped around a refusal to actually see the person they were gesturing at. My Aunt Ruth, who'd raised me those last 3 years, wasn't on the guest list for that wedding either. Vivian had capped attendance at 150 and told me gently that there simply wasn't room for extended family beyond immediate parents. My own mother's sister, not in the room for the most important day of my life. Here's the part I don't say out loud very often, even to Elliot. I let all of it slide. The erased credit, the missing aunt, the years of, "we know what's best." Because some small, unhealed part of me kept hoping that if I was patient enough, agreeable enough, Vivian would eventually decide I belonged. My own mother had been gone 13 years by the time I met her, and some nights I caught myself wanting Vivian's approval with an intensity that had very little to do with Vivian at all. My business partner, Dee, has run operations at Bennett & Co. for 6 years and has watched every one of these small erasures happen in real time, usually while helping me troubleshoot someone else's wedding crisis on the side. When I told her about the shower call, she didn't hesitate. "Nora, she's done this to you for 4 years straight. A shower is not going to be the one time she suddenly sees you. Let her throw her little party and plan your own celebration with your own people, the ones who actually know your name." She wasn't wrong, and I told her so, and then I did the thing I always do, which is proceed anyway, because I was 32 weeks pregnant, exhausted, and unwilling to spend what should have been a joyful season locked in a fight with my mother-in-law over a guest list I hadn't even seen yet. I told myself I was choosing peace. I think, if I'm honest, I was choosing hope one more time, the same hope that had followed me since that dentist's waiting room 3 years earlier. Elliot, when I mentioned it, just sighed the particular sigh of a man who's watched his mother do this his entire life and never once found the right moment to stop it. "I'll talk to her," he said. He didn't. I don't fully blame him. I understand now how hard it is to draw a line against someone who raised you to believe the line didn't need drawing in the first place. I want to tell you what I expected pulling into the Whitfield driveway that Saturday. 20 folding chairs, a pitcher of sweet tea, maybe a diaper cake somebody's aunt made from a Pinterest tutorial. What I found, from the end of the drive, was a white event tent large enough for a wedding reception, a catering truck from a company I didn't recognize, and a professional photographer setting up lighting umbrellas on the front lawn. I counted cars the way I count vendor vans on my own job sites, out of pure habit. 14, then 20, then I stopped counting because it stopped being useful information. By the time I made it up the walk, 8 months pregnant and moving slower than I wanted to admit, I could hear at least 60 voices already carrying from the veranda. Vivian met me at the door in a cream silk dress, took both my hands, and said, "Surprise, darling. We just couldn't keep it small once everyone heard." Behind her, on an easel by the entrance, stood a professionally printed step-and-repeat banner in soft gold script, welcoming baby Whitfield. Not Bennett Whitfield, not even Whitfield Bennett, just Whitfield, printed and laminated and standing at the entrance to a party celebrating a child that was, as far as I understood the biology of the situation, also mine. I said nothing yet. I walked through to the veranda on legs that had started, quietly, to shake. The tent covered the entire back lawn, draped in white linen with gold Chiavari chairs I recognized from a rental company I use myself for weddings twice the size of this. A four-tier cake stood on a dessert table beside a floral installation that must have cost close to what I charge for an entire wedding's centerpieces. Imported peonies in April, flown in from somewhere they don't grow locally, arranged by a designer I didn't recognize, and Vivian clearly hadn't hired through me. And there, on a side table near the gift display, sat Vivian's grandmother's crystal punch bowl, the one cracked along the rim from a fall decades ago, the same bowl that appears at every Whitfield family event, like a piece of scripture. 90 feet away, near the kitchen entrance, I watched two catering staff in ill-fitting polyester vests hauling ice in the Charleston heat. No water breaks visible, no shade, hired, I'd learn later, through a discount temp agency, at a rate I would never in 10 years have offered anyone working a 12-hour outdoor shift. Performed elegance on one table, quiet cruelty 90 feet away. I filed that contrast the way I file every operational detail on a job site, silently, completely, permanently. I scanned the crowd for my own people. My college roommate, Priya, who'd driven 6 hours to be here, nowhere. My cousin Mara, who I'd specifically told Vivian about weeks earlier, nowhere. My Aunt Ruth, the woman who'd raised the back half of my childhood, was not on that veranda, not anywhere I could see, and my stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the baby. Just close family, Vivian had promised. I was looking at 80 of hers and none of mine. The small comments started almost immediately, and any single one of them, on its own, would have been easy to forgive. It was the pattern that landed. Vivian's longtime friend, Corinne, a woman I'd met exactly twice, squeezed my arm and said, "How sweet that Vivian's doing all this, since you're clearly so busy with your little catering thing." 10 years and 90 events a year, filed neatly under little catering thing, by a woman holding a mimosa, I'd bet money came from a case Vivian's assistant had picked up that morning. A second guest, someone's cousin whose name I never caught, glanced at my stomach and said brightly, "Didn't realize you were still working in your condition. Vivian mentioned you'd probably want to slow down soon." I had not mentioned slowing down to anyone. I had 3 weddings on the books through my due date, and a maternity leave plan Dee and I had built 4 months earlier. Vivian herself delivered the third brick without seeming to notice its weight at all, standing near the gift table, telling a cluster of her friends, "Nora doesn't really have family here to help with all this planning, so I simply stepped in." My Aunt Ruth had raised me for 3 years. My cousin Mara had been my maid of honor. Vivian had erased both of them in a single sentence, in front of 60 strangers, with the same warm smile she'd used on the phone about the guest list. I stepped away around the hour mark, telling Vivian I needed the powder room, and instead found myself in the small guest bathroom off the side hallway, sitting on the closed toilet lid with my hands pressed against my eyes, doing the math on how many more hours I could hold this expression before something in my face gave out. That's when I heard Vivian's voice, muffled but close, on the other side of the bathroom's shared wall, near the side patio where she'd apparently stepped out to take a call. "No, I understand, but let's keep the photography focused on family. We don't need Nora's people in every shot. This needs to read as a Whitfield event, not a work function." A pause. The seating chart keeps her side toward the back corner. It photographs better if the family's centered. Nora's people. Her side. I sat on that closed toilet lid with my hand over my mouth, understanding, in one long, cold wave, that the guest list had never been an accident and the missing banner name had never been an oversight. Someone had built an entire event around erasing me from it while I stood inside the tent smiling for photos I now understood weren't meant to include me at all. Stay with me, because I want to tell you what I did with those next 4 minutes, sitting on that bathroom floor with my hand pressed flat against my stomach, feeling the baby shift like she already knew something had changed. I didn't cry, though I came close. I opened my black leather notebook, the same one I carry every single day, the one with every vendor's cell number written in my own hand, and I found a name I already knew would be there. Because here's the thing Vivian never asked me, in all her insistence on handling everything herself. When she booked this tent company, this caterer, this florist, this photographer, she'd asked her assistant to get the best rates in town, and her assistant, new to Charleston, new to event planning, had done exactly what any smart junior coordinator does. She'd called around. And 3 of the 4 vendors under this tent, I now realized, walking back out through that hallway, were companies I'd worked with for years, companies that extended preferred pricing through Bennett and Company's standing account, because Vivian's assistant, without knowing it, had booked this entire party's key vendors directly through my company's discount tier, under my business's name on the paperwork, because that's the account that had gotten her the rate Vivian wanted without ever asking why it was so good. I walked back onto that veranda, and Vivian's oldest friend from the junior league, a woman named Beatrice, patted my hand and delivered the fourth brick without meaning to soften it at all. You know, dear, it really is generous of Vivian to take the reins on something like this. Some women just aren't built for the domestic side of things. I had built an entire company on the domestic side of things. I said nothing. I was counting minutes now, not guests. Vivian found me by the gift table 20 minutes later, tapping a small silver spoon against a champagne flute, gathering the crowd's attention with the same ease she'd used on every phone call of the last 4 years. "Before we open gifts," she announced, loud enough to carry across the whole tent, "I want to share something. We've had the sweetest idea for the birth announcement. Elliot and I discussed it, and we think it would be simplest, cleanest, if the baby's name on the announcement just read Whitfield. No hyphens, nothing complicated. It's what's best for the family, and honestly, it's what's best for her future. The Whitfield name opens doors in this town." The second delivery. "We know what's best for this family," now aimed directly at me, in front of 80 people, dressed up as a favor to a child who didn't have a name yet. She held up a printed announcement card. Already printed, already ordered, weeks before this shower, weeks before anyone had asked Elliot or me a single question about our daughter's last name. "Announcing baby Whitfield," it read, in the same gold script as the banner at the door. 60 faces turned toward me. Champagne glasses paused mid-air, waiting for the grateful smile Vivian had clearly rehearsed this moment expecting. "It's simpler this way," she said, a third time. Softer now, but no less final. "We know what's best." I let the silence sit. 1 second. 3. 5 full seconds under a white tent full of people who had spent the last hour reminding me, brick by brick, that I was a guest at my own life. Corinne's mimosa hovered an inch from her lips. Beatrice's smile started to falter at the edges. Elliot, standing near the drink table, went very still, the way he does right before he finally says something he's been holding back for years. "My daughter's last name is Bennett Whitfield," I said. Quiet, level. "That's not a discussion. It's already on her birth plan, in writing, with my OB, my attorney, and Elliot's signature. It's decided." Vivian's smile held for exactly as long as it takes a woman who has never once been publicly corrected to recalculate her footing. "Nora, sweetheart, let's not do this here." She glanced at the crowd, at the photographer already lifting his camera toward us, and I understood she was more worried about the photograph than the conversation. "You're right," I said. "Let's talk about something simpler. This tent, this catering, the florals. I noticed the vendor invoices this morning routed through Bennett and Company's account. I said it the way I say everything at a job site, calm, factual, the tone I use when a client's check bounces the week of their wedding. I run that account. I'm the one who has to authorize final payment before any of these vendors pack up tonight. The caterer's lead server, a young man named Desmond I'd worked with on a dozen weddings, appeared at the edge of the tent at almost exactly that moment, clipboard in hand, looking for someone to sign off on the final course release. He found me before he found Vivian, out of pure habit, because my name was the one on his invoice. "Ms. Bennett, we need a signature to release the second course. Mrs. Whitfield's assistant said to check with you if there's any question on timing." Vivian's face did something I'd genuinely never seen it do in 4 years. It went blank. She recovered fast, the way women like Vivian always do. "That's simply an administrative thing, Desmond. Go ahead and proceed. Nora will sort it out later." Desmond glanced at me, uncertain, the way any good vendor does when 2 people who both seem to be in charge give him conflicting instructions in front of 80 witnesses. I looked at Desmond, not at Vivian. "Actually, hold the second course. I need 5 minutes." I turned to the florist's delivery coordinator, hovering near the dessert table refreshing the peony arrangements, and asked her quietly whether the final balance on today's order had cleared. She checked her tablet, visibly uncomfortable, and told me the invoice was still marked pending under Bennett and Company's account, awaiting my sign-off, same as always. 2 vendors, 2 confirmations. Vivian's face had gone from blank to something closer to fear, the particular fear of a woman realizing, in real time, in front of her entire social circle, that the party she'd built to control the narrative was standing on paperwork she'd never actually controlled at all. The photographer, sensing the shift in the tent the way good photographers always do, lowered his camera and simply waited. "You want to talk about what's best for this family?" I said, still quiet, still level, the tone I use for a room instead of a shout. "Then let's talk about the fact that my Aunt Ruth, who raised me, isn't here. My cousin Mara, my maid of honor, isn't here. But your assistant used my company's vendor discounts to throw this party and put a banner at the door with a name I never agreed to." Vivian tried once more, reaching for the printed announcement cards on the gift table, an instinct to control the physical object the way she'd always controlled the narrative. "Nora, this is not the place." Her hand shook slightly, picking up the cards, and Beatrice, beside her, quietly stepped back half a step, the first small crack in the audience Vivian had spent a decade curating. "You're right," I said. "It isn't. So I'll make it simple." I looked at Desmond, still holding his clipboard. "Please proceed with the meal as planned. The guests didn't do anything wrong today, and they shouldn't go hungry over this." Then I turned back to Vivian. "But those announcement cards don't go out. I don't need your name on my daughter to make her real." I never did. Nobody clapped. Nobody gasped dramatically the way it happens in movies. What actually happened was quieter and, I think, more honest. A tent full of Charleston's oldest families slowly finding somewhere else to look. The particular silence of a room recalibrating who actually held the room. In the weeks that followed, word moved through Vivian's circle the way it always does in a town that size, not loudly, but completely. Beatrice, I learned through Elliot, quietly stopped attending 2 of Vivian's regular luncheons that spring. Corinne sent me a stiff, formal note a month later that read less like an apology and more like damage control, which I filed exactly where it belonged, in a drawer I don't often open. I want to be clear that none of this felt like triumph. Watching a woman's carefully built reputation take a small, deserved dent isn't satisfying the way I expected it to be. Mostly it just felt sad, the way it's sad to watch someone lose something they spent decades protecting instead of building. Vivian did not apologize that day, or the next week, or the week after. What she did, 3 weeks later, was show up at our house unannounced on a Tuesday evening, holding a small, unwrapped gift. A hand-knitted baby blanket, plain white, clearly made by her own hands, rather than ordered from a shop. She stood on our porch for a long moment before she said anything. "I didn't know how to do this the right way," she told me. "I've never once had to. I'm sorry about the name. I'm sorry about your aunt. I don't expect you to forgive it today. It wasn't everything. It also wasn't nothing, and after 4 years of we know what's best, I let it be enough for one Tuesday evening." The second, quieter thing happened the morning after the shower, when my Aunt Ruth called, having heard the whole story from my cousin Mara within hours. She didn't ask about the tent, or the banner, or the announcement cards. She asked when she could come hold the baby. She arrived 2 days later with a quilt she'd hand-stitched over 4 months, squares from my mother's old dresses sewn in around the border, and held both my hands the way Vivian never once had in 4 years, and said, "You've always been enough, Nora," long before any of them figured that out. What I learned, standing under that tent in front of 80 people who had spent an hour deciding I was a guest at my own life, is that anyone can print a banner. Anyone can order announcement cards weeks in advance and decide quietly whose name belongs on them. Nobody can make a family real by leaving the actual family off the guest list. If you've ever been made to feel like a visitor in your own story, I hope you hear this the way I finally did. You don't need anyone's name on the invitation to know the life inside it is yours. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to her final chapter, because there's another one waiting for you next week.